Michael was born in Detroit, surrounded by neglect, hunger, and prejudice. He grew up without a father, with a mother who worked night shifts and lived on broken promises. At 16, he watched the only person he had in life be rushed to the hospital in a coma, while he fought not to fall into the same pit that swallowed up his entire neighborhood. He was humiliated, rejected, written off. But then he met a mentor, found a small garage, and was given a chance. And right there, almost without realizing it, he began to turn the game around. What he did next surprised even those who had stopped believing in miracles. Michael learned early on that life didn't offer warm welcomes. He was born in a public hospital in Detroit on a freezing January night, wrapped in worn-out sheets and silence. His mother, still a teenager, held back tears. His father? Just an empty space on the birth certificate. By the age of 3, Michael already knew what hunger was. Not the kind where you wait for your next meal, but the kind that burns, twists your stomach, and hollows out your eyes. His neighborhood felt like a war zone, between gangs, sirens, and locked doors. When people asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, Michael would just stay quiet, because where he came from, simply growing up was already a miracle. He grew up in a house where the roof leaked and hope slipped through the cracks. His mother did everything she could, cleaning other people's homes, working double shifts at a diner, but the money barely stretched to rice and milk. Even with all her effort, there were nights when the fridge sat empty, like it was mourning with them. The neighborhood was dark, the looks were suspicious, and the sound of violence played like a broken record through the night. With every gunshot on the block, young Michael learned that faith wasn't something you were given. It was something you had to build piece by piece inside your chest. At school, prejudice didn't even try to hide. His worn shoes, stained uniform, and borrowed notebooks made him a walking target. And still, Michael pushed forward. He sat in the front row, copied everything, secretly read old books from the library. He's got the eyes of a dreamer, a teacher once whispered, like it was something dangerous to say out loud. But the other kids mocked him, called him the backpack bum, teased him for not having lunch, not having a dad, not having anything. And deep down, he learned to swallow the shame. That's how his persistence was born, in the pain of not giving up, even when everything pushed him down. At 7, he saw his best friend taken by a gang. At 9, he almost got taken too. He ran through an alley, knees scraped, heart pounding. His mother cried in silence. "This city's gonna kill you," she whispered, but they had nowhere else to go. It was in that chaos that Michael learned to keep his mouth shut. Words became his shield, his eyes, tiny windows to a world nobody else could see. Every new day was a fight, but he kept going, because deep down, he knew this couldn't be all there was. There had to be more. There were plenty of nights he slept on someone else's couch. Plenty of mornings he left the house not knowing if he'd make it back. The neighborhood screamed poverty, but if you looked close, you'd find moments of kindness. An old lady sneaking him a piece of bread, a mechanic fixing up broken bikes for the kids. It was in those small gestures that Michael built a shy but steady kind of faith. He believed that if he just held on a little longer, maybe tomorrow wouldn't be as cruel. And it was that faith, raw, sweaty, stubborn, that kept him going. His childhood didn't come with birthday cakes or vacation trips. It came with rain leaking through the window, blankets that were too short, and nights that felt like they'd never end. It came with effort nobody clapped for, victories no one saw. But through all the chaos, there was something inside him that wouldn't die. A quiet little urge to get out, to be more than just another statistic. And that urge grew, like a seed pushing through a cracked sidewalk. It was his form of resistance, his silent reply to a world that kept saying, "You'll never make it." One time, Michael stole a loaf of bread, and he never forgot the shame that came with it. Not because of his outstretched hand, but because of the look of disgust in the baker's eyes. That day, he made himself a promise. He would never beg life for anything again. One day, he'd have his own money. He'd buy his own bread and his dignity. That promise echoed every time he stumbled. It became his secret fuel, because to Michael, poverty wasn't just about not having things. It was about not being respected. And that, he swore, would change. At 12, he started working secretly at a car wash. He wasn't legally allowed to, but he needed it. The smell of soap, the cold water on his hands, the exhaustion deep in his bones. It all became part of his daily routine. And he didn't complain. In fact, he smiled. After all, it was money. Not much, but it was something, and it was his. In those hard-earned dollars, he saw the first spark of achievement. He saved every penny like someone collecting hope. Life was still hard, but for the first time, it felt like something was shifting. In his neighborhood, many gave up. They fell into crime, dropped out of school, disappeared. But Michael didn't. He held on to what little he had, and what he dreamed of having. Not because he was better, maybe just more stubborn. His persistence made people uncomfortable. What do you think you're going to be, huh? President, they mocked. And he just looked down and stayed quiet. Because he knew if he talked too much, they'd laugh at dreams he didn't even know how to explain yet. But inside, something bigger than fear was starting to grow. And it was right around that time, on the edge between pushing forward and giving up, that something unexpected happened. Something small but powerful. A spark, a meeting, a simple gesture. Someone new would soon enter Michael's life without knowing they were about to change everything. And that boy at the car wash, fatherless and aimless, was about to discover that even the darkest nights can hide a light invisible to most. Michael's teenage years hit like a storm, ripping off roofs and ripping away certainty. The car wash let him go. "You're too old now to be hanging around here begging for scraps," they said. He tried other odd jobs, bagging groceries, handing out flyers, helping on construction sites. But there was always a no, "Hey, come back tomorrow, and we already have someone." The constant rejection started chipping away at what was left of his self-esteem. And when he looked in the mirror, he'd quietly ask, "Is this really all I am?" His effort didn't seem to be enough anymore, and his faith started to crack. School wasn't much better. Harsh comparisons started to surface. Other teens wore name-brand shoes, had new phones, bright futures. Michael had calloused hands and a torn backpack. Teachers admired him, but no one helped. "You're smart, you just need to apply yourself," they'd say. As if it were easy to focus in class with an empty stomach or with a constant worry about whether he'd have a place to sleep that night. And still, he kept going. But even persistence has limits. And at that moment, he was running on fumes. One night, his mom didn't come home from work. Hours turned into days. The police said she'd been attacked while leaving the restaurant. She was alive, but in a coma. The hospital was far. Visitors were limited. Michael felt his soul split in two. "Not now, not this," he kept whispering, as if the words could stop the inevitable. His mother was his anchor. Without her, the world felt like open water in a storm. A kind elderly neighbor took him in, but it wasn't a home. It was a shelter, and Michael was just another lost teenager wandering the city streets. The days turned gray. Michael started skipping school. His life became a cycle of hospital visits and odd jobs. There was no time for friends, no space for smiles. Every step felt like a struggle. Every night, a fight against despair. And in that emptiness, the wrong kind of people showed up. A group from the neighborhood, baggy clothes, cold stares, offered him easy money. "You're smart, Michael. You'd do great with us." He hesitated. He needed money. He needed to survive. But he also knew that shortcut could cost him everything. He said no, but the doubt, it lingered. At 16, he failed a grade for the first time. The school principal called him in. "You've got potential, Michael, but you have to help yourself." He just nodded. Inside, he wanted to scream. Potential didn't put food on the table, didn't pay the bills, didn't care for a mother in a coma. It was easy to talk about overcoming when you had a home, a family, some kind of support. But in his shoes, the hole was deeper. Still, he promised himself he'd try again. Not for him, but for the woman who taught him to never give up. For the mother who still breathed, even if she couldn't speak. The humiliations came in daily doses. There was a girl at school, someone he secretly liked. One day, she found out he was living off someone else's charity. In front of everyone, she laughed. "He probably stinks just like that coat he wears," she said. And the room echoed with cruel laughter, sharp like knives. He didn't cry, but that day he bled inside. He walked home in silence, punching the walls until his hands were raw. The pain became anger, and the anger became drive. He didn't want to be invisible anymore. He wanted to prove he was worth something. But how? Where to start? The questions hit like thunder, without answers. At 18, he went for his first real job interview. He wore a borrowed shirt, carried a handwritten resume, waited 2 hours to be seen. When he finally walked in, the manager looked him up and down. "Where did you go to school?" Michael answered, naming his public school. The man frowned. "Sorry, we don't have any openings right now." But Michael knew. The job existed, just not for someone like him. That day, he felt the weight of prejudice hidden behind polite words. It wasn't the pain of doing something wrong. It was the pain of never being given a real shot. He tried selling candy at intersections, tried washing cars on his own, tried just about everything. But nothing seemed to work. The candy melted, the cars disappeared, and when people didn't ignore him, they laughed. His persistence became something to mock. "Give it up, kid. Go marry someone rich." He pretended not to hear, but each word felt like a rock in his pocket. In life, it was a river way too deep. Still, he kept swimming, not out of courage, but because there was no other option. When you've lived at the bottom, you stop waiting for someone to throw you a rope. You learn to climb out with your bare hands. Even shaken, his faith never left him. Sometimes at night, he'd write letters to himself. Simple things. "You're going to get out of this. Your mom is going to wake up. You're going to win." It was his way of holding on. Maybe his way of talking to God. Or maybe just a way to keep from going crazy. And as strange as it may seem, those letters kept him on his feet. Because in them, there was still a flicker of hope. A reminder of who he wanted to be. And a quiet whisper calling him to whatever came next. Then, after so many no's, a yes finally came. Small, almost unnoticeable, but just enough to crack a door open. And sometimes that's all it takes, a crack, a push, a meeting. Without knowing it, Michael was about to cross paths with someone who would change everything. Someone who saw something in him that even he had nearly forgotten. That, yes, came inside a crumpled envelope. A local nonprofit called Detroit Hope was offering free courses for at-risk youth. Classes, bus fare, career guidance. Michael almost tossed the flyer, thinking it was just another empty promise. But something inside him, maybe his tired faith, maybe the ache of missing his mom, pushed him to wake up early that morning, by choice for the first time in months. He arrived sweaty, not believing there'd still be spots available. The woman at the front desk smiled. "You made it just in time, Michael. Welcome." The course was on automotive mechanics. Engines, tools, calculations, things he'd always found fascinating, but out of reach. The first classes hit hard. Everyone else seemed to know more. He stumbled through answers, feeling lost, dumb, like a stranger in a room full of dreams and grease. He almost gave up, but during a break, a teacher named Ray sat down beside him. "You're not dumb, kid. You're just tired, and tired people learn slower. But they learn." Michael looked at the gray-haired man with watery eyes. It was the first time someone told him he could. Ray became more than a teacher. He became a mentor, or better yet, a compass. He shared his own failures, his scars, his debts. "Did you know I lived in my car for a whole year?" he once said, laughing. Michael's eyes widened. "You?" Ray nodded. "And now I teach. Because someone once taught me. That's how we make it." Those words hit deep. Michael realized that overcoming wasn't about winning fast. It was about trying again and again. And in that noisy workshop, his effort started to bear fruit. He began to understand engines, how to take things apart, put them back together. He gained confidence, started laughing more, asking questions, helping others. Life was still hard. He still lived with a neighbor, his mom was still in a coma, but now he had a routine. And in that routine, he found purpose. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about becoming someone. The persistence that had followed him since childhood now had direction. And that changed everything. One day, Ray pulled him aside. "I need help in my shop. Just part-time, but it's paid." Michael froze. Pay. His heart nearly leapt out of his chest. It was his first real job. Contract, set hours, even a name badge. He spent mornings in class and afternoons working. His body ached. His hands were always blistered. But he smiled. It was the kind of pain that heals. He felt useful, alive, needed. And when his first paycheck came, he cried in the bathroom. "It's not much, but it's mine," he whispered, holding the envelope to his chest. With the money, he bought things most would find ordinary: a new pillow, a notebook without dog-eared pages, a book about engines. And most importantly, a flower to leave by his mother's bedside. "I'm trying, okay?" he said quietly. There was no response, but there was peace. His faith, once so battered, started to grow again. Like a tree, even when pruned, still finds a way to bloom. Every small win was celebrated, because only someone who's lived through real struggle knows how to treasure the things the world calls small. One afternoon, a man pulled into the shop in a black Mercedes. He got out in a rush, and Michael, wearing his uniform, ran to assist him. When he popped the hood, Michael gave such a solid technical explanation that even Ray was caught off guard. The client smiled. "Where did you study, kid?" Michael chuckled. "I'm still studying, but I have faith I'll go far." The man introduced himself as the owner of an executive taxi fleet. He asked for Michael's number. "I'll be needing someone like you soon." And in that handshake, something was planted. The kind of opportunity that takes time to arrive, but when it does, it changes everything. With his new salary, Michael was able to buy better clothes, help the neighbor who had taken him in, and stash away a portion of his earnings in a blue envelope. He wrote on it, "College." He didn't know if he'd make it there, but for the first time, he allowed himself to dream of it. When his mother finally opened her eyes, months later, it was Michael who held her hand. "I'm here, okay? We made it through a little part." She gave him a weak smile, tears in her eyes. That moment was worth more than any accomplishment. It was love. It was persistence. It was faith rewarded. It was during that phase that Michael learned something essential. Your past doesn't have to define your future. He was no longer just the rejected boy, the son of a missing housekeeper, the kid from the car wash. Now he was an apprentice, a mechanic, a promising student. He was someone who could fix engines and rebuild a life. But the hardest battles were still ahead. Because winning isn't about reaching the finish line. It's about continuing, even when everything starts to fall apart again. And that's exactly what happened. Just when things were finally settling down, came the hit. A real test, a tough choice, a moment of pressure. And Michael, with his hands still covered in grease and eyes full of dreams, was going to need more than just courage. He was going to have to reinvent himself. Again, the job with Ray didn't last forever. The shop had to close because of old debts. It hit Michael hard. "I can't keep you on, kid. I'm sorry." Michael swallowed hard. He didn't blame Ray. He knew that man had already given him more than anyone ever had. With a tight chest and his blue envelope in hand, Michael found himself back at square one. But he wasn't the same anymore. Now he had skills, experience, and faith. So he took a risk. With what little money he had, he bought used tools and started fixing cars on the neighbor's sidewalk. No sign, no setup, just him and his effort. At first, the neighbors were skeptical. "That kid's going to mess something up," they said. But all it took was one well-done repair, one engine roaring back to life, one happy customer, and word started spreading. Michael was good, really good. What life had denied him in comfort, it gave him in understanding. He listened to his clients, took time to explain things, treated people with respect, and that made a difference. In less than 6 months, that sidewalk became his base. Some days, he couldn't even keep up with the requests. He worked from 7 in the morning to 9 at night. His body begged for rest, but his soul was alive. At night, he studied, online, on his own. With an old phone, frayed headphones, and YouTube tutorials, he dived into vehicle electronics, small business basics, and accounting. He read everything he could about opening a legal business, issuing invoices, registering a company. "I'm going to go legit," he told himself, scribbling notes in a beat-up notebook. Persistence became his daily habit. Every day brought a new challenge, but also a tiny victory. And slowly, that's how he began shaping not just the mechanic, but the man. Back home, his mother was still recovering. She needed expensive medication, a special diet, daily care. Michael did everything himself. "You're my hero," she would say, and he'd smile. But deep down, he knew heroes cry too. There were days he broke down in the shower, quietly, so she wouldn't worry. The weight of it all crushed him sometimes. But faith never stepped aside. It'll pass, he whispered like a mantra while folding laundry, making food, checking overdue bills. It was a juggling act, but one he was willing to take on, because it was for her, and for him too. He managed to get a small grant through a local government program for young entrepreneurs. With that money, he bought a tarp tent, a used hydraulic lift, and had a sign made. M.A. Auto Electric, service with respect and trust. The sidewalk turned into a shop, and the shop became a dream under construction. The neighborhood started seeing him differently. That kid, once the fatherless boy with the torn backpack, was now the guy who really knows how to fix cars. The recognition came slowly, but it came. His persistence was finally bearing fruit. But it wasn't all smooth. Competitors tried to sabotage him. An older mechanic started spreading rumors, saying Michael used old parts, that he wasn't certified. Michael took a deep breath, didn't respond, just kept going. And soon, his own clients came to his defense. He fixed my car better than the big shop downtown. He's always respectful. He explained everything in plain language. And just like that, through word of mouth, the business grew. Because real effort is quiet, but it echoes. On tough days, he remembered the letters he used to write as a teen. He decided to start that habit again. But now, he wrote to his future. When I have a big shop, I want to hire other young guys like me. When I can, I'll start a fund to help single mothers. The letters became a plan, a map, and that kept him grounded. Even on days when an engine wouldn't start, a client complained, or the electric bill showed up late. He knew every achievement begins with a dream and a decision to keep going. One day, a luxury car pulled up in front of his shop. It was the same client from the black Mercedes, the one who shook his hand months ago. He stepped out, looked around the makeshift setup, and smiled. "I knew you had potential, Michael. Let's talk." And right there, leaning over a grease-stained hood, came the offer to manage maintenance for a small fleet of vehicles. With a salary, a contract, full benefits. Michael almost fainted. It was everything he had ever wanted. But he paused. He looked at his shop, his mother, his neighborhood, and realized the decision wasn't simple. He accepted the offer, but set one condition. "I want to keep my place, even if I have to work double." And that's how it was. By day, he worked as a manager. By night, he returned to his own garage. He slept little, ate poorly, but finally felt in control. For the first time, he was the one steering the wheel. Life still demanded effort, still pushed him to the edge, still hurt. But now he had structure, support, connections, and faith that the worst was behind him, or at least that now he knew how to face it. And it was in that new chapter, packed with sleepless nights, tight deadlines, and overwhelming schedules, that Michael took the boldest step of his life. A project born from a silent promise made years ago, at his mother's hospital bedside. Because even after gaining ground, building a name, and finding stability, something still felt missing. Something that didn't fit in spreadsheets or contracts. Something bigger. Michael's first big achievement was symbolic. He bought his mother a motorized wheelchair. She cried in a way she hadn't in years. "You've always been my miracle, my son," she whispered. He hugged her, and for the first time, felt like he was giving back to the world some of the faith he had received. The woman who raised him with leftovers and prayers could now leave the house, see the sky, go to church. And more than that, she could witness her son blossom, because Michael was finally blooming, and she had been the seed all along. The sidewalk setup became an official workshop. New signage, uniforms with embroidered logos, and real employees. He hired 3 local boys. One of them was the son of the neighbor who had once taken him in. "You saved my boy, Michael." He just smiled. He didn't want applause. He wanted continuity. He believed true overcoming should ripple outward. That real effort can't die with the one who made it. It has to become a bridge. And that's how Progetto Alternativa was born, a free Saturday course for teens from the outskirts. He didn't just teach mechanics, he taught hope. Soon, the media took notice. First a local article, then a spot on TV. From car wash to business owner, the young man who became a symbol of persistence. He didn't love the labels. He knew the road was still long. Success, he said, was like an endless staircase. Every step revealed the next. But he couldn't deny that the visibility opened doors. He landed sponsors, partnerships, donations for the project. But more than that, he inspired. People from across the country wrote to him, saying, "You're the reason I didn't give up." Michael began receiving invitations to speak. He showed up in a plain shirt, calm voice, raw story. He talked about hunger, prejudice, pain. And he also talked about faith, persistence, and small victories. He didn't sugarcoat anything. It wasn't pretty. It was necessary. And the rooms went silent. Because in him, people saw themselves. The invisible boy who refused to disappear. The man who decided to change not just his own fate, but the fate of those who came after. Eventually, he wrote a book, Life in Greece, an honest account of struggle and survival. It became a bestseller among teens in low-income communities. Public schools adopted it as required reading. Teachers said students finished it wanting to try again, to try living, to try fighting. Michael didn't write as an author. He wrote as someone who had made it out. Each page felt like a letter to the past, a hug to the present, and a spark for the future. He bought a simple but cozy home, a grassy yard, a swing for his nephews, a bright room with big windows for his mother. Sometimes he'd lie on the couch, stare at the ceiling, and smile quietly. Not because he was rich, because he wasn't, but because now he had something he'd never had before, peace. And peace, he knew, was rare. A reward after all the struggle. A trophy for not giving up. Still, even in that calm, he kept going. As long as there's a kid out there hungry for a future, he'd say, "I still have work to do." He opened new branches of his workshop in other neighborhoods. He brought his students along to work in them. He set the ground rules: respect, discipline, empathy. He trained the boys just like Ray had trained him. "You're not dumb, you're just tired. But you'll learn." He repeated that line like a legacy. And every time a young guy lifted his head after making a mistake, Michael saw himself in that moment. It was like looking back in time. And he understood. The greatest victories in life aren't measured in numbers. They're measured in impact. One day, Michael was invited to receive an award. He walked up to the stage with his mother in the audience, holding a bouquet of flowers. They said beautiful things about him. He listened, smiled, and thanked them. But in the end, he said, "All of this is nice. But the most beautiful thing is knowing that the boy who once wrote letters just to stay sane now writes projects that help save lives." The audience gave him a standing ovation. But in Michael's heart, there was only one image. The boy, covered in grease, hungry, sitting on the sidewalk. And the unshakable truth that that boy would never be forgotten. Michael's story didn't end there. And maybe it never will. Because he understood something most people don't. Success isn't a finish line. It's a new responsibility. And as long as there's someone out there who needs a hand to keep going, he'll be there, with calloused hands, steady eyes, and faith in his heart. Because that is what true victory looks like. To come from nothing and become shelter for so many. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire. New ones every day. Leave a like if you believe in the power of those who never give up. Tell us in the comments. Do you think you could have done what he did?